Hi gang. So we're going to start off chapter 1. Now this is Windows Server. It's previously been called the LAN class, local area networks, and we're dealing with Windows Server 2016. We did the install, the configuration. This is of the networking courses, the client server courses that we have. This is probably the most comprehensive because it deals with everything, not just dealing with server itself, but also Active Directory and the group policy, group management. So with that said, let's move on. What we're going to do in this course is, at least in this chapter, explain the role of server operating system has in a network, describe Server 2016 roles and features. We're going to explain the core technologies of Windows Server 2016 and summarize the new features of Windows Server 2016. Okay, the role of a server operating system. Now, the function depends on the type of business that's going to use it, the size of the business, and the extent to which the business has committed to using technology to aid operations. It's not a one-size-fits-all, and we have different types of server configurations, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. The server is used to provide services that aid the operations of an organization. Okay? So the server becomes, or I should say, a computer becomes a server when the software is installed on it that provides network service to client systems, or client computers. OSs such as Windows 10 and its predecessors are designed to be on desktop computers. These operating systems can perform server functions such as file and printer sharing, but they are actually client systems. Windows Server 2016 and its predecessors are designed as server operating systems. But you can use Windows Server 2016 on your desktop computer. It's just a really beefy install. Hey, Windows Server 2016, it de-emphasizes many of the Windows 10 user interface bells and whistles in favor of a less flashy and less resource-intensive user interface. It has more of a downgraded interface, and it doesn't look as complex as it had. But we still have Server Core, and Microsoft makes Server Core version with no graphical interface, and it is the default Windows 2016 server installation option, even though it's not the easiest to interface with. The desktop experience, at least for me, is more user-friendly. Now we can create NanoServers. It's a new installation option that nearly strips away the user interface altogether. Okay. In Windows Server 2016, the network services, we have file and print sharing, web server, RRAS, DNS, DHCP, FTP, Active Directory, DFS, HyperV, fax server. We've got so much going on with this version. Okay. Now, when the Windows 10 desktop OS, it only supports Hyper-V, file and print sharing, web server, and FTP server in limited capacity. But if we think about it, Win 10, that's a client system, and it supports Hyper-V, so we can create virtual machines on that client system. Win 10 is restricted to 20 logged on users, and Win Server 2016 includes fault tolerance features such as redundant array, or RAID 5, redundant array of independent disks, load balancing, and clustering. Right. The server role is major function or service that a server performs. Role services add functions to the main role, and Windows Server roles and role services are installed in Server Manager by clicking Manage and clicking Add Roles and Features. Now, server features provide functions that enhance or support an installed role, or add a standalone function. A server can be configured for a single role or several roles. Here's an instance of Server Manager, and here's our interface. Now this is on desktop experience. And when we go to determine the roles, we just pick and choose. It's like cafeteria style. What do we want to have associated with this server? HyperV, DHCP, Active Directory. What are we going to use this server for? Could be a single role or could be multiple roles. Now, Windows Server 2016 core technologies. There's Server Manager, NTFS, Active Directory, Microsoft Management Console, disk management, file printer sharing, Windows networking, PowerShell. PowerShell, some love it, some hate it. Hyper-V and cloud computing and storage spaces. Now that's what we have in Windows Server 2016 core. Now, the Server Manager provides a single interface for installing, configuring, and removing a variety of server roles and features. It summarizes the server status and configuration. It's a very comprehensive interface, and it includes tools that can diagnose problems, manage storage, and perform general configuration tasks. It can be used to manage all servers in your network. There's a dashboard that shows a list of tasks, summarizes installed roles, and shows available servers that you can manage. So here we go. We see that it's got file and storage services, local server, all the servers. And we can go configure this by adding roles, dealing with other servers, create a server group. There's so much that we can do. And we can come down the left, deal with the local server, all servers, and file and storage services. This is what we see right now. So, new technology file system. God, it's been around for decades. It's not new anymore, but we're still going to call it NTFS. It was introduced in Windows NT in the early 1990s. It's an important feature. It's got capability to set user and group permissions on both folders and files. Administrators can specify which users can access a file and what users can do with a file if they have specific access granted to them. And increases a server's environment's security on just not a single level, but multiple levels. Okay, we've got the MMC, Microsoft Management Console. Creates a centralized management interface for administrators. It uses snap-ins, which are designed to perform specific administrative tasks, such as disk management. An important feature is the capability to connect to servers remotely. So we don't have to be directly connected to a server. We can do it over the network. MMC, here's the interface on it, and we'll go connect and format any of our disks. Now, disk management, use it to manage disk and volumes in Windows Server 2016. Use disk management snap-in or file and storage services role to be able to do it. Both tools can be used to monitor disk and volume status, initialize new disks, create and format new volumes, troubleshoot disk problems, configure RAID, and we've got file and storage services. It also lets us create storage pools for storage spaces. We'll deal with that in a chapter later on. So when it comes to file and print sharing, or file and printer sharing, gives us advanced features such as shadow copies, disk quotas, and distributed file system. We also get redundancy, version control, and user storage restrictions. So depending on what kind of network topology we're going to deal with, or how we're going to configure our network, we could have a work group model. It's a small collection of computers that share common roles, such as sharing files or printers. It's also called a peer-to-peer network. It's decentralized logons, security, and resource sharing. There's no core control over the entire system. Everybody just kind of comes together as a fluid or dynamic group. Now it's easy to configure because you just connect them. It works great for you got less than 10 computers. A Windows Server 2016 server that participates in a workgroup is referred to as a standalone server because in a workgroup model, it is not a server type system. It's not client server. All systems that are connected in a workgroup are all treated equally. Now in a domain model, it's preferred for a network that has several computers or requires centralized security and resource management. And that's the typical network you're going to see today. It requires at least one computer to be a domain controller. The domain controller is a Windows server that has Active Directory installed, and it's responsible for allowing client computers to access domain resources. Now, a member server is a Windows server that it's in the management scope of a domain, but doesn't have Active Directory installed. It could be, say, a DHCP. So the network connection. It's a collection of networking components all working together. Network interface is composed of two parts. A NIC, or a network interface card, and the device driver software associated with it. So let's take a step back. The operating system can only control the hardware if there's a device driver software that allows that communication between the OS and the hardware. The NIC is the hardware itself, so we need those two components, the NIC and the device driver software. Okay, it's configured in Network Connections windows, and in the text you see Figure 1-6. You can see a picture of how to configure the NIC. So the network protocol, that's what specifies the rules or how we're going to format the communication between devices that are being networked together. Look at it like if we're going to have a conversation, we have some rules. 1, the language we're going to speak. 2, don't talk too fast, don't talk too slow, don't talk too soft, don't talk too loud. Now, there's all little things that may irritate somebody in a conversation, but it's the protocol that we follow and we adapt to what the rules are. In network communication, we primarily use TCP/IP version 4 because we haven't been forced to use TCP/IP version 6 yet. I don't think it's far down the road. Okay, here's an example of how we'll access those network connections. And once we get in, here are the connections, the different things associated with the connection. Now you see we've got Internet Protocol version 4. It's selected. That's one of the things associated with this network connection. And if we put focus on that, we could select the properties associated with it and configure it. Now, network client server software, we have to have software that works as a client. And if we're going to have a domain controller, the domain controller has to be able to control what's going on a network and interact with the other systems that are on the network. So a network client's part of the OS, the operating system itself, and it sends requests to the server to access network services. It's almost like being in a room and throwing your hand up and saying, I have something to say. So if you're not able to do that, the communication is not going to take place. In Windows, the client software it's called Client for Microsoft Networks. Now, network server software receives requests for shared network resources and makes those resources available to a network client. So it's not unlike somebody sitting in a room holding their hand up. Can I get some paper, please? Can I get pencils, please? Whatever the resource may be. And then the server is much like a teacher going to hand out those or share those resources to the rest of the group. In Windows, the server software is file and printer sharing for Microsoft networks. So it's file and printer sharing for Microsoft networks. So Active Directory Domain Services. ADDS, that role, installs Active Directory, and it turns a Windows Server 2016 computer into a domain controller. Now we say domain. What do you mean domain? Well, that just says that we are a group of computers that you log into the domain. There are shared resources throughout the domain, and the domain has a name, much like every computer has a host name. The domain itself that you're joining is named to distinguish it from other domains. The main purpose of ADDS is to handle authentication and authorize users to be able to log into the system. So it's centralized, secure access to the system. Rather than just logging into the client machine, you're logging into the network itself. Active Directory stores information in a centralized database, giving administrators a tool for deploying user and computer policies, installing software, applying patches, updates, and other things to client computers in the domain. Active Directory's main purpose and feature, it's to provide a single point of administration of network resources, to provide centralized authentication and authorization of users to network resources, along with DNS to provide domain naming services and management for a Windows domain. So it enables administrators to assign system policies, deploy software to client computers, assign permissions and rights to users of network resources. That's all in Active Directory. And we'll touch on that quite extensively in this course, and then you'll have likely an entire another course about it. Now, PowerShell. Server Core uses PowerShell. It's a command line interactive scripting environment that provides commands for almost any management task. It's used much like a command prompt. It looks a lot like it, but it uses commandlets. Now, commandlets, I'll talk about them a little bit more in a second. There's hundreds of commandlets that are available in PowerShell, ranging from performing simple tasks to managing aspects of Active Directory. Windows Server 2012 and Windows 8.1 are equipped with PowerShell. Microsoft has continued updating PowerShell in Windows 2016, which is equipped with PowerShell 5.0. Now, there's a new feature called PowerShell Direct for managing virtual machines with PowerShell directly from the host computer. Now, here's an example of PowerShell, and I said I'd talk about the commandlets in a little bit. Names for PowerShell commandlets are structured as verb-noun pairs. So we'll see something like get disk, get verb, disk noun. And that's our command. Now think of it as reserved or keywords. It means something special to this system. Using PowerShell, we can see information about a particular disk. You could use get disk number 1, and number is a parameter associated with the disk, and it allows us to control these things, but it's not as user-friendly as one would like. But sometimes we don't want things easy to get at, because the easier they are to get at, the easier they are to misuse, mismanage, or mess up. All right. You can list all the commandlets by just saying get command and then get asterisk and just show me what all the commandlets are, and it'll go through and it'll show it. PowerShell can take the output of a commandlet and pipe it to another commandlet, and we'll use the pipe character, and that's usually above the backslash on a keyboard. That's what we call pipe. Sometimes on the key it looks like it's split in the middle, but here they're showing it as a solid line. Okay, HyperV in cloud computing. Cloud computing is a collection of technologies for abstracting the details of how applications, storage, network, and other computing resources are delivered to users. Virtualization, on the other hand, that's core technology of cloud computing. It uses software to emulate multiple hardware environments so that multiple operating systems can run on the same physical server or system unit simultaneously. Now, virtual machine, that's the virtual environment that emulates a physical computer's hardware and BIOS. So look at it like it thinks it's a real box. It thinks it's an entire system unit, all the hardware's there, but it's all done virtually using software. The host computer is the physical computer or the system unit that we install the host operating system on. The host operating system then has virtual machines running on that. So virtualization software, there's a number of different things we can use. VMware, hypervisor is a software component that allows us to look at what's going on. And HyperV, that is the services that allows us to create these virtual machines in Win10 and in Server 2016. Okay. So we've got different kinds of clouds. We've got a public cloud, a private cloud, and we've also got a virtual desktop infrastructure. Now, in that, users connect to a private cloud with a web browser or client software, and they can access their desktop from any internet connection. So we've got different storage spaces, whether we're using USB, SATA, SAS. Drives can be internal, external, remote, RAID. There's so much that we can do now. New features in Windows Server 2016 include NanoServer. That's huge. Windows containers. They are far more efficient than anything we've dealt with up till now. Storage spaces direct, storage replica, PowerShell direct, that's a new flavor of PowerShell, and nested virtualization. We can have virtual machines that exist on virtual machines. That's crazy, the extent that it's going. So NanoServer, it's geared towards virtual machines. It's not intended to be a full-fledged server. It's targeted at specific uses. There could be a web server, DNS server, a specific file sharing. There's so much that we could do with them. It's compartmentalizing tasks onto a NanoServer. It has no real user interface, and the NanoServer recovery console that allows us to move forward with it. Now, here we go. Here's the recovery console. Containers are what we have now that is just so efficient, so streamlined. It's a software environment in which an application can run, but is isolated from the rest of the OS and other applications. Almost everything an application needs to run is contained in the container. It's such a small, tight little package, and everything's there, so that any changes made only affect that application. Containers make application portable between Windows systems, and they can be moved to another server without all the usual installation process. They're very efficient, very quick to roll out, and they've got low overhead. One or more containers deployed on Windows Server still share a single Windows Server kernel between the host OS and the other containers. So storage space is direct. It expands upon the software-defined storage nature of storage spaces. We've got storage replica, PowerShell direct. We've talked about that a little bit already. Nested virtualization, I talked about it. And then we've got a chapter summary. So go ahead and wrap it up. We covered a lot in this first unit. There's a lot that we're going to cover. This is, like I said, the most comprehensive networking class, and you hit the ground running hard in this first one. So I'll see you in the next chapter.